Crossover edition, the voice of college football meets Ballard Sports Media. I think it's the first time we've actually had Mark on the channel. I've called into many of his shows a few times. Mark, how are we doing today?
Doing well, Ballard. Appreciate you being here, man. Thanks for having me. And this should be a fun time.
Yeah, absolutely. I love your work and what you guys do at the Voice of College Football. And when I was talking to Joey, I said, we're doing conference week again, where we cover each of the Power Five, or even if you want to call it Power Four now. We did the Pac 12 yesterday, still kind of consider it, a major conference, even though it has fallen off. But I said, we got to get the Big Ten. And when he said he could get you on, I said, absolutely, I'm in.
I'll take it. I appreciate the invite.
Yes, sir. So you look at the Big Ten this year, it's a new era with realignment. I got to ask you, which of the four new teams, UCLA, USC, Oregon, Washington, what do you think of those four is bringing the most value to the Big Ten this year?
Oregon's the best team until I see otherwise. They are significantly the best team, best coach quarterback combination right now. Uh, Defense was really strong last year, although they lost some bulk up front. They were a top 20 or 25 defense by most metrics. They've got playmakers all over the place, probably of the best wide receiver in the Big Ten, and Tez Johnson. Yeah, I really like Oregon as being the best team right this second. Now, long term, historically, USC's not debatable as the best brand, the best program historically. Now, whether they'll be able to recapture that remains to be seen. They've got a lot of work to do on defense and in recruiting against Oregon in particular.
Yeah, I think you could make a case for either USC or Oregon. I think Washington, I think what they've done, like what they did last year with Kalen DeBoer getting to a national championship. Kalen DeBoer is gone now. I still think they'll be okay. I think there's some drop off there, but I think like there's not really a bad team coming into the Big Ten. Even UCLA has some good history too. It's kind of been, I mean, Chip Kelly, great head coach, I think. I just I would say that's probably number four, but I would say USC is probably the big name brand that's coming into this conference this year. So uh, I would
Absolutely.
also ask, yeah, I would also ask, how have you over like in your lifetime and over the years, and you know, how have you seen growth in brand in this conference in terms of you know like the teams that are there, the competition. Because for a while, I mean, you look at history, Penn State's been historically good with Joe Paterno. You look at what Michigan has done, they just hit over 1,000 wins last year. They're pretty much the winningest program in the country in terms of all-time wins. Ohio State has competed for national championships. Michigan just won one. So how have you seen the Big Ten each year, year in and year out, just grow in brand in college football?
Well, are we talking on the field or off the field?
You could talk both if you want. I know
Okay.
on the field they've done great, but I know you also get into like the TV market and everything. If you want to discuss that.
Yeah, if we talk on the field, I was just talking about this on my channel a few minutes ago that it's not debatable that the SEC has been the best conference for 15 to 20 years. Before
Mhm.
that, it was debatable, and the Big Ten was certainly in the mix. Now, maybe certain media outlets have overblown how much of a gap that there's been, but again, I will argue with anyone and easily win the argument that the SEC has been the best conference. Now, will that change? So, despite Michigan winning a national championship last year, if you take the totality of the conferences top to bottom, the SEC still was a better conference than the Big Ten last year. Not by a ton, maybe the gap is closing. Uh, Now we've got these 6 new teams entering these 2 conferences. And of course, the SEC made the first move with Oklahoma, Texas, which would have launched them considerably higher and just in a dominant position. Then the Big Ten countered with USC, UCLA. UCLA, from a football standpoint, has not been a factor in a long time, but needed to come in the deal with USC. And now that Washington and Oregon are part of the mix, I think it's a pretty good debate as to who gained more ground. Had that only been Oklahoma and Texas against either one of those 2 pairings, it would have clearly been the SEC had gained more ground and furthered the gap, widened the gap. But with 4 schools entering the Big Ten, I think that we may have a debate on our hands. But until proven otherwise, if we ranked the Big Ten and the SEC and these schools top to bottom in their football teams going into 2024, I don't think there's any question that the SEC is still deeper. Now, the Big Ten has gained a lot of depth with these 4, but the SEC is still deeper. Now, in terms of the brand, and yeah, you laid it out there pretty well. Penn State joined the Big Ten in 1993. They were a great addition to the Big Ten. They have not been a major factor nationally. They've only won 4 Big Ten championships. They've always been near the top of the league, but they don't seem to punch through and win the championships. Again, only 4 since 1993. Ohio State by far has been the most dominant and most elite consistently over that span of time, whether you're looking at the last 10 years, the last 20 years, the last 30 years, the last 50 years. Michigan, of course, has placed themselves in a position of dominance, and now they're in a place of transition, having won 3 consecutive Big Ten titles and a national championship, but complete overhaul with, I shouldn't call it even a complete overhaul, because they've been very calculated in trying to maintain their culture by hiring from within or reaching out to former Michigan players and assistants. So I got to credit, although it remains to be seen whether it's going to work. I will credit Michigan because I think they've gone about this transition in the best way possible, staying very close to their culture and people that are connected to the culture to make this transition of coaches and coaching staffs as smooth a transition as possible. So it's going to be a very interesting mix of teams to join the Big Ten and see how much they can compete right out of the gate. But those are pluses on all sides for the conference in adding those 4 schools. Now, in terms of a brand, that's a bit of a different deal, because the Big Ten has been much closer and arguably been better than the SEC as a brand. I still would argue that the SEC as a brand, with everything taken into consideration, has been a little higher than the Big Ten. But right now, of course, the Big Ten just was able to sign a larger media deal. When you look at rear ends in the seats and eyeballs on the TV screens and all of that, these have been the 2 dominant brands in college football. And that's even being more accentuated by the realignment and the additions. And they will further dominate. And we could go into all sorts of storylines and metrics as to proving what the statement I just made, but I'll only use one. Consider this, that throughout history of these power conferences, every venture they've ever gone into together, they have always split everything equally. Any venture that the Pac 10, 12, whatever they've been at the time, the Big 10, the SEC, the ACC, the Big 12, back to the Big 8, back to the Southwest Conference, they've always gone into it with a complete even distribution, considering themselves complete equals. Up until this 10-year playoff run of 4 teams, they were splitting the playoff pool equally. But what's going on now? We're launching into a 12-team field. The amount of money is skyrocketing because of the amount of games. And The Big Ten and the SEC are taking 58% and leaving 32% for the ACC and the Big 12. That, in and of itself, shows you exactly where this sport is and where it's headed, that these two conferences run the sport.
No question they run the sport, and I think they have for a long time, but it's not going to end that way, like, or that itself is not going to end anytime soon. You know what stood out to me is, you know, you have these conferences, like we could talk all day about Florida State and the ACC, and now Clemson's eventual exit too. Uh, the Big 12 lost. I mean, it's crazy how the realignment's happening and everything. But like, notice this: the SEC didn't lose anybody. They want to pick up Texas and Oklahoma. That's fine. I gotta ask though, like the Big Ten is, I mean, it's a war right now with the SEC, isn't it? Because they lost no teams. Think about that. They lost no teams, but they go pick up four: Washington, Oregon, USC, UCLA. Are they doing that, like looking at the SEC and saying we could do better than what you're doing, bringing in Texas and OU?
Well, from the time that this all started, meaning realignment, and this first move was made, and just to be clear about how this Texas Oklahoma deal came about, for a lot of people out there that are college football fans that are hating on the SEC, thinking that they were trying to break up the Big 12 or trying to take the best of the Big 12. Texas and Oklahoma made the phone call. They were the ones that reached
Mhm.
out to the SEC. So the SEC just made a prudent business move. Who is going to not want Oklahoma and Texas in their conference? So the SEC
That's
just
true.
just made the
Yeah.
smart business move. So it's, as I have said for a long time, the dysfunction of college sports is that no one is running the sport. Uh, it's not Greg Sankey's responsibility to run the sport. It's his responsibility to do what's best for the SEC. And what is best for the SEC is not always best for college football. And what Tony Petitti does as Big Ten commissioner is not necessarily what's best for the sport. That's not his responsibility. That's not his job function. His job function is to run the Big Ten and to make the Big Ten the most money and to represent the Big Ten in the best possible way. So there's an obvious conflict and contradiction there that, for example, the NFL doesn't have to deal with because they're all working together. They're all doing, the owners get together and they don't think, okay, well, my team's in the AFC East, therefore I'm going to do what's best for the AFC East. No, they're making decisions that's best for the entire sport and for the entire league. College football doesn't operate like that because there is no governing body, there is no continuity there. Maybe we're working toward that with the SEC and the Big Ten getting together with this advisory committee and with them pretty much dictating terms of this playoff. So maybe we're headed um, in that direction. Going back to your original question about why these schools were added, I think it simply came down to this. And again, this was my original statement when all this started. I don't think it's changed, that Oklahoma and Texas made the call. The SEC made the good business move to bring two of the best programs in the country in. All right. Then the Big Ten counter moved. And that from here on out will continue to be the pattern, will be one of two things. Either each league is going to see the moves made by the other league and they're going to make a counter move to offset that, to try to either maintain their leadership or stay within fighting distance. Or the other thing that's moving realignment is just the evaluation of these schools and their football programs to see if they're worth putting on television. So anytime that the Big Ten or the SEC or any conference wants to expand, they go to their television partner and say, okay, we're going to add Utah and Colorado. And then we're going to see, okay, do they add value to our television contract? Or even if they don't add value, do they at least keep us on even terms of distribution? And if they do, then we will consider um, adding those schools to our conference. So I think it's one of two things that are driving realignment: the arms race of staying ahead or staying even with your rival conference. And number two, it's just simply evaluating the schools that are on the table and deciding, do they bring value? And there's probably four schools left outside of Notre Dame in the ACC that bring value, and that's Clemson, Florida State, Miami, and North Carolina.
For sure. We got Mark Rogers, the voice of college football, talking Big Ten this afternoon. Jackson Johnson says, I wouldn't be surprised if the SEC tried to add Florida State, Clemson, Miami, and Georgia Tech just to one up the Big Ten. Makes a good point there. And you just mentioned at least three of those schools with Clemson, Florida State, and Miami. Georgia Tech is kind of on the rise a little bit with Brent Key. But I mean, yeah, I the way that I keep viewing all this stuff is when the Big Ten added those four teams and the SEC only added Texas and OU, and now the ACC's got their hair on fire right now because what if these teams jump ship? The only way I could view it is it's almost like this college football, brand war right now. And maybe it is, I mean, it's he does make a good point with this comment for sure. Because I don't know. I would say the Big Ten is probably doing more work to try to add teams like that than the SEC is right now. Would you say that?
No, that's a great question. I don't know how either of these conferences view. I know that they don't want to be squashed by the other one. They don't want to have the perception be so. The perception is fairly equal right now, both the perception and the reality of where these conferences stand in terms of the money they make, the level of play. It's fairly even. We can argue all night whether the Big Ten has superseded the SEC. That'll be proven on the field this fall and in the next few years. But in terms of money, popularity on TV, all that, it's so close that I don't see, and I just in answering your previous question, basically answered this one that yeah, these are some of the factors that drive realignment. That neither one of these conferences is going to let the other one outdistance it. Um, when the SEC made the good business decision to take on Oklahoma and Texas, the Big Ten countered. And as soon as the Big Ten countered, that started the descent of the Pac 12, which had teams scrambling. And shoot, the Big 12 desperately wanted Oregon and Washington, but Oregon and Washington wanted to join the Big Ten. Well, the Big Ten had to vet that situation out. They're only paying a half of a distribution, full share distribution to Oregon and Washington. So that's how much Oregon and Washington would rather join the Big Ten than join the Big 12. They take half the money of the Big Ten deal and still join the conference. So I believe that Florida State and Clemson are certainly at the level that either one of these conferences would most likely take them. I don't see Clemson being a good fit for the Big Ten for a number of reasons, but I think Florida State's a good fit for either one. I could see all sorts of configurations. I don't think anyone has a lock on the way this is going to land. The schools that Jackson mentioned and other ones, including Virginia, those schools could land anywhere. Although I've produced enough videos to kind of outline where I'm leaning and where I think the indicators are. Uh, Clemson's more of an SEC school for a number of reasons to me than a Big Ten school. Florida State geographically is an SEC school, but they've made a number of moves that are kind of in the Big Ten's direction. One being AAU status that they're pursuing, and they're in the final round there. Miami just acquired AAU status, which is a big deal for the Big Ten. I have long since said that if I was the Big Ten, I've said 5, 6, 7 years ago that I'd go and try to lure Florida State and Miami. And this is before there was issues with the ACC. I'd go to Florida and try to grab Florida State and Miami, because the one advantage that the SEC has over the Big Ten that's been mitigated to a certain extent with USC and UCLA and California joining the Big Ten is the number of players. The Big Ten checks off all the boxes: money, fans, big brands, academic institutions that are elite. They check off all the boxes, except there aren't enough football players in their footprint. And that's where the SEC has an advantage. And that's why if I was the Big Ten, I'd go to Florida.
Yeah, I did want to ask a little bit about the recruiting aspect of the Big Ten today because, Ohio State for 2025 has the number one class in the conference, USC behind them, then Rutgers. You got some five stars recruited amongst some of those schools already, but you know, how have you seen the past couple years, Big Ten kind of develop in recruiting? Obviously you got SEC schools like Georgia and Alabama. They could go and nitpick out players from Texas, from California, all they want to. I know Ohio State's got like Devin Sanchez as a corner that's from Texas. They got a guy that I had talked about on my channel a few weeks ago. Naheem Offord is from Birmingham, Alabama. So even Ohio State and Ryan Day in the Big Ten are like, they are expanding their brand a little bit to these different states and picking up big time football players. What about some of the other teams out there in Michigan, Penn State, even? And if you want, I mean, we could even talk about USC, Oregon, all these new teams coming in as well in terms of recruiting and how they're broadening outside of their own territory.
Yeah, if you look at national recruiting, Ohio State has been the only school that's been able to maintain pace with Alabama and Georgia to a certain extent. I would argue that Georgia and Alabama have developed deeper rosters. Like, I think Ohio State's elite talent, their top 20 players, their top 30 players are right there with Georgia and Alabama and have been for years and years and years. I think, if you look at waves of defensive linemen, that type of thing, that's where Georgia and Alabama have been stronger than Ohio State. But looking at national recruiting, you can go back to Jim Tressel's era in the 2000s, and I can name all sorts of great Ohio State players from Florida and Georgia and California. But Urban Meyer he was the guy that really started to land high level players: Joey Bosa, Nick Bosa, CJ Stroud CJ Stroud, of course, from Ryan Day, but from, and tons of others I could name from southern states and from California. So that's not really a new thing. Ohio State's a recruiting monster, and they are far and away way ahead of everyone in the Big Ten, and have been for a long, long time. For, again, at least as Urban Meyer, as long as he's been there. Michigan, of course, should capitalize from winning a national championship and winning the conference 3 consecutive years. The recruiting rankings would not show that they have, but
Right.
there's a transfer portal, and they've been better than anyone in the Big Ten at making a difference in the transfer portal. Penn State recruits nationally. They're really strong. Of course, most of their players are going to come from Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, their region. I would expect that the two schools, not counting the Pac-12 schools that came in yet, that are making the best inroads in recruiting are Wisconsin with Luke Fickell and Nebraska with Matt Rule. They're improving their recruiting considerably. Those two schools. The two things that really changed the conversation we're having right now versus the conversation we would have had 5 years ago is the transfer portal. Number one, look at Florida State. They
Right.
just went 13-1 and won the ACC, and any significant player that we name what came through the transfer portal. Uh, all the star power on that team was through transfers. And again, Michigan's done the best job. Let's say the transfer portal's really been humming for about 3 years. They've done the best job of the top of the Big Ten. Now, Ohio State made a huge splash this offseason. Caleb Downs from Alabama, Seth McLaughlin from Alabama, Quinshon Judkins from Ole Miss, Will Howard to play quarterback from Kansas State. So they've made the superstar additions this year. The other thing that we can't account for, and we'll see how it plays out, is NIL and how that much changes recruiting.
Absolutely. If anyone, real quick, has any questions for Mark or myself regarding the Big Ten, leave them in the comments. We'd love to get to you guys. Shout out to the comment section. Got a lot of great people watching today. Appreciate it. I want to ask about Penn State. And I don't know if you knew this was coming or not, but we got to talk a little bit about James Franklin because, I like Penn State. My grandparents are Penn State fans, and they have had to, I don't want to say suffer, but they've had to put up with the James Franklin factor in Happy Valley. And how have you what was it about 2016 that they were able to win a Big Ten title, but yet they just struggle year in and year out? They can't, it's always seems like they run into Ohio State early on. That's their first loss, whether it's at home or on the road, and then they hit the Michigans it's like they're always a play away from beating up on the bigger teams in the conference. So, and their recruiting is off the charts right now. So, how does Penn State get back to that? And also, how is the 12-team playoff going to help them out in the long run? Because you could make a really good case that they have been a top 12, top 15 team each of the last, I'd say, about half decade or so.
Absolutely. Yeah, you don't even need to make a case. It's not even a debate. All you have to do is look at the rankings and the records. They've been a top 10 or 15 program over the last close to 10 years. So the first thing I'll hit on is you bring up James Franklin, and then we know that Penn State was winning championships at one point under Joe Paterno, competing for national
Right.
championships. But for any Penn State fan that's quick to jump on James Franklin, Joe Paterno from 1994-5 to the time that he finished his career, 2011, he was doing the same thing James Franklin was doing for the last, and maybe not as good for much of that time. Shoot, Joe Paterno had losing seasons during that 15 years or so. But most of the time, pretty much doing what James Franklin's doing, losing to Ohio State, and if Michigan was any good, and not winning the Big Ten. So, yeah, Joe Paterno is Joe Paterno. He's an all-time legend, but his big mark on the sport was back in the 70s and 80s and early 90s before joining the Big Ten. So, yeah, James Franklin maybe takes a little heat for some things that haven't been in existence at Penn State for 40 years. Yeah, they've lost to Ohio State, I think, 12 out of 13 years. And most of those games have been right down to the wire, and they've blown leads. James Franklin is not a great in-game coach. He just isn't. Is he a horrible one? No, that's his reputation. He takes too much of a hit. His reputation, like most things, one or two situations get blown out of proportion, and there becomes a narrative. And most people that knock James Franklin's in-game coaching really, they're just parroting what other people talk about. They don't know what they're talking about. He's been a decent in-game coach, but he's not a top game coach. Um,
Yeah.
they're recruiting well, but you got to realize Ohio State's recruiting with Georgia and Alabama. So Penn State's not approached that level of recruiting. Yeah, they can't get by Michigan now, but that's a very recent thing. So they were pretty much trading wins with Michigan up until 3 years ago. Um, so, and then to your last point, there's no doubt if Penn State keeps playing at the level that they're playing, um, if you run the seasons during the college football playoff era against the new model, the 12 team, Penn State will benefit more than any school in the country if they keep playing at this level. Uh, think about this. Michigan made the playoffs 3 times, Penn State 0 in the last 10 years. And of course, Michigan's in the last all 3 in the last 3 years. That if there's a 12 team playoff, Penn State would have made the playoffs more times than Michigan would have.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think, don't Penn State has been knocking on the door, not of a championship, but they have been knocking on the door of a CFP, just appearance, just an invitation, just to get in, just to be right there. I mean, you're talking New Year's Six Bowl every single year, like almost at least. I think maybe once they were making like an Outback Bowl or something when we had that, or I mean, they've just been right there. Michigan just won a championship. Ohio State's won a championship at least 9 years ago. So the Big Ten's got a big brand, but obviously, I think there's a lot of people out there that would like to see someone else. I think that first year when Michigan won the Big Ten with Jim Harbaugh, I think everyone's like, this is amazing because Ohio State had won what they win like three in a row, something like that. And then
Yeah,
like
what,
Michigan came up.
17, 18, 19, 20, 4 in a row. And really,
Yeah,
even to be truthful about it, even years Ohio State didn't win the Big Ten, they were usually considered the best team. They just dropped
didn't make
one game.
it. Yeah, but I think the Big Ten's going to benefit from a lot of big things going forward in college football, especially with the 12-team playoff, getting a couple more teams in there. And I think, and this is my opinion, I think Michigan winning a title last year was only just the beginning of the Big Ten trying to prove how dominant of a conference it really is.
Yeah, the Big Ten is playing for championships. They have all the money and brands and prestige and the facilities and everything else to be expecting to be in championship competition.
Absolutely. Mark, that's really all I got for you. I don't want to hold you up too much because I know you're busy. But tell everyone where they can find you if they haven't found you already. I don't know what they're doing with their time, but and everything you got coming to your channels.
We are at the Voice of College Football. So if you just type that into the search bar, you should be able to find us here on YouTube, Voice of College Football. And we are producing videos and going live every day. And we've got an array of channels for you to join as well. So it's not just the main national channel. We've got Ohio State, Michigan, Iowa, Nebraska. I'll highlight those 4 just because they're in the Big Ten, but we've got tons of SEC channels and the ACC and the Big 12 as well. So please join us, and we think you'll have some fun. Ballard, thank you so
Awesome.
much for inviting me. I appreciate the offer, sir.
Yes, sir, Mark. Anytime you want to come on here, you're always welcome. And I'll keep calling into your shows and everything. So we got some more stuff to talk about, but thank you.
Thank you, sir. Have a good day.
You too, Mark. Thank you. All right. Hope you guys enjoyed that with Mark Rogers. We got some more stuff on the show today. Definitely want to look at a team preview. And I know what you're thinking. Who is it? Nebraska. We get to pick on them a little bit. So we'll try to, try to be fair with it and just kind of talk it up a little. But definitely want to get your thoughts on Nebraska this year because Matt Rule coming in year two, we know about the downfall with Scott Frost and everything like that. Nebraska is that team that could be knocking on the door of a bowl game this year. They could be. And it's a possibility that they do okay. And it's probably even a possibility that they make a bowl game. I gotta hear from you guys. And we'll also keep in touch with the comments and any questions you have regarding the Big Ten and all that. But you look at Nebraska's schedule here. Let's see. We want to put this up and talk about it. So UTEP, Colorado, Deion Sanders, of course, now in the Big 12, Northern Iowa, Illinois, at Purdue, Rutgers is homecoming. You get the bye week. And how the calendar falls, everyone gets 2 bye weeks because of November 30th and all that. Rutgers, bye week, at Indiana, at Ohio State. You make a case those are losses. UCLA, off week, USC on the road, Wisconsin, and at Iowa. And also, when you look at Nebraska of last year, let me pull this up too. Uh, a little bit unprepared today because of talking to Mark. But you look at what they did last year, 5-7. That's one game shy of making a bowl. And you also got to take into account this that they had games, Nebraska did, that were one possession games. One of them went to overtime with Wisconsin, 13-10 against Iowa on rivalry weekend, 20-17 against Michigan State. So they had opportunity. Like if things went their way for Nebraska, even that first game against Minnesota, you're looking at a Nebraska team with one, two, three, five more wins. You, I mean, they could have easily been 10-2, but I also know that you would sit there and say, but they weren't 10-2, but they had close games. They had really close games that just got out of hand. So, what does that say about this year? I haven't looked too much into their recruiting and everything that they have, but if we're looking at Nebraska for Nebraska, Nebraska's that team that hopefully is getting better. And if Matt Rule is the coach he was at Baylor, he's going to get better, right? I would expect Nebraska to make a bowl game this year. But the question is how many wins do we give them? I'm going to say UTEP's a win. Colorado could be a loss. I think it comes down close. That's an NBC Peacock game. Colorado in the Big 12. I go back to my Colorado preview. I I don't remember what I picked. I think I gave Colorado that win. But knowing what's happened with Colorado and everything, and thinking more about Deion Sanders, who I got a lot of respect for. I mean, I don't think anybody out there actually hates Deion, but you got to call it what it is. That I would say Colorado and Nebraska are in the same boat of being shy of a bowl, but someone is obviously better here, and that's Nebraska. So give me 2 wins there. Northern Iowa's a win. Illinois could be a tough game. That's at home. It is a night game. I think Nebraska could end up being 4-0 going into that Purdue game and then take a loss. Rutgers could be a loss. Let's see. It just gets tougher as the season goes on. I got to hear from you guys. What do you guys think of Nebraska's record? I would put them at most they could go 6-6 with this schedule. It gets tougher as it goes on, but if you pick up the wins early, Like if you could win, like because you could win UTEP, Colorado, you win those first four. Because even Illinois is struggling too. That's four wins. What are the other two? Iowa late in the year. Do you get them again? Like or I know you lost to them last year, but could you find a way to win that game? You also took it close with Wisconsin. What if Nebraska's just a small inch better this season? What if? And I know we're playing the what if game, but holy cow! Like I mean, it's going to get tougher as the year goes on, but there's a really good chance you could have a 6-win Nebraska team that makes a bowl game. That's a good possibility. So I look at this. I'm going to say about 5-7 again. I see 5-7 again. I see it being a repeat of last year, but I wouldn't be surprised if they pull one upset, just one, that pegs them in a bowl. Now, 12-team playoff and everything, we talked a little bit about that today. Keep dreaming. Aerosmith, dream on, baby. Dream on, Nebraska. That ain't going to happen. But I think 5-7 is about doable. Getting to the comments of this too, the Cornhuskers have an easy start to the season with the first half of 2020, and that's the key. That's the key is the start of the season. UTEP, Colorado, Northern Iowa. That could be 3 wins. Illinois could be a win. Rutgers could be a win. That's 5. And then you got to pick up Iowa or Wisconsin at the end because you're not beating the California school. Well, I don't know. Could they beat Chip Kelly at home? Could they beat UCLA? Could they pull that off? Mm, I don't know. I haven't looked into the Bruins. We talked about brands with Mark today. It's a good brand. It's a good team to bring in. But Nebraska, don't give up yet. Don't give up yet. I don't want to look too far ahead to 2025, but if it's not this year, maybe they're making a bowl game next year. We'll see. Not 5 wins. Nebraska 2024 floor is 7 wins. What? LFG says he also says that he likes Nebraska against Purdue, Rutgers, even UCLA. Yeah, Purdue's a struggle bus right now. That could, yeah. Rutgers always kind of been a struggle bus. They've gotten better, I guess, but and then UCLA. I just don't know about the California schools. I really don't know how these new teams are going to work out. But I'm not going to disagree with your comment, LFG. One more comment, then we'll get out of here. I think Nebraska is not going to have that much improvement over last year with Matt Rule. Bowl game maybe, but maybe next year they can win 8 or more. Ooh, bold take by Joey Foster. 2025 8+ wins for Nebraska. I could. Why could I see that? Again, I don't want to jump too far ahead. Let's focus on 2024. But consistency and improvement with Nebraska is very possible under Matt Rule. I would agree there. But again, I would peg them no more than 6 wins this year. If they do pull an upset, 5-7 is probably what I'm going to stick with, though. And that's just their that I think you're looking at 4 to 6 wins for Nebraska. Some of y'all are saying 7. I guess you can make a case, but that it's still a tough schedule. All right. I'll clip that later for a Nebraska preview. I think that went well. I'll call it a Nebraska preview. Just talking it up. So, uh, Nebraska will have way better offense in 24. Yeah. Yeah, I could see that. Definitely. Definitely. Joey puts them at floor is 4 wins, ceiling of 7. Makes sense. All I was trying to say though is looking at this year's schedule, it's kind of hard. Like Northern Iowa and UTEP, you better win those. Colorado, you got to be better than that. That's 3. Illinois, Illinois struggles. I mean, you play all 4 games at home the first 4 weeks of the year. You could start out 4-0, take a loss to Purdue. Could you win all your home games? That's the thing. Can you win all those home games early in the first half of the season? Maybe you lose to Wisconsin. I mean, I think this. I could see how the schedule favors Nebraska being at home for most of your games against mid to low tier Big Ten teams. Thing is, Nebraska cannot Nebraska this up. You know, like they can't do what they've always done and choke it away. Because like even last year, remember we talked about it. If things go their way to start the season with Minnesota, also if they beat Maryland and Michigan State, you're looking at 7-5. You're also looking at an overtime game with Wisconsin. You're also looking at that Iowa game. Like they close wins, if those went in their favor, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 extra wins. I mean, are they not 10-2? I mean, think about it. Think about it right here. Anyway, that's going to do it for the Big Ten show today. Appreciate Mark for coming on. Love you, brother. Appreciate what you do for us college football fans. And y'all go subscribe to him and all of his channels. Subscribe here if you're new. We will be back. What do we have tomorrow? Let me see. Tomorrow's the 12th. Tomorrow night, Wednesday, 10 p.m. Eastern, the two Irish brothers talking up the ACC. I'm going to get back in touch with them this afternoon, double check, make sure we're still good, but we should have an ACC show tomorrow for Conference Week 2024. Love you guys. God bless, and we'll see you next time. Jesus loves you. I love you too. We'll see you.